Now in this lecture we are going to learn more about functions. Previously we have learned that functions are a really handy way of taking a complex set of instructions and packaging them together inside a block of code that has a given name to it. And when we want to execute all this line of code over here, all we have to do at any point later in our code is just to call our function by typing its name and set of parentheses. Now in our case, our function's name is my first function, and we can call this function by typing the function name, which is my first function, and parentheses over here. And when this line of code is run, it's going to search where the function is defined. So it's defined up over here. Then it's going to execute all lines of code that are contained within this function. Now here, to see how it works, I want you to head over to Replit and create a new function called greet. Now here, to create a function, it's obvious that we need def keyword. So I'm going to write def keyword, and we know that it's a keyword, and that's why as soon as we type it, it changed the blue color. And after keyword, we have to give a name our function. Now in this case, we are going to name our function greet. Then after that, we are going to put parentheses. Then we are going to put colon over here. So after colon, if we hit enter, we enter into a block of code because we are indented over here. Now the first thing that I'm going to do to create print statement which says just hello. So I'm going to put print statement hello. Then I'm going to add next print statement. It's going to be how are you? Print how are you? Now we have created our function. Now it's time to trigger the function, or in programming lingo, call the function. And as we said before, we do that by calling the name of function and adding set of parentheses. So here you need to be careful that when you are calling function, you don't have to put it its indented level. It should be with same level that we have declared it. So I'm going to put greet. Then if I hit run, you'll see that it's going to find the function that we declared over here, and it's going to execute the all lines of code that we have in our function over here. So that's pretty simple. Notice that every single time if I call this function over here, it's going to do the same thing. It's just going to print out these two lines of code to the console. Now in reality, it's rare that you want to repeat the same instructions every single time when you call function. It would be nice if you could modify some parts of the code inside function and allow a little bit variation. For example, it would be nice if we could greet somebody by the name. So let's say if I put my name over here, Ershad, instead of just saying hello, we can say Ershad over here. So after hello, if I put Ershad, and here I can put over here as a also how are you Ershad. Now if I run our code, you will see that the output is changed. So here it says that hello Ershad and how are you Ershad. Here again, my name is hard-coded over here. Now if we want, for example, for each time when we call our function to put different names over here, how can we achieve this functionality over here? So instead of each time greeting the Ershad, we can greet a user based on the username that we provided to our program over here. So the main question is, how can we achieve this functionality? Now we need to look more closely at these parentheses. Now what we can do is we can actually add the name of variable inside these parentheses over here to start giving our functions some input. So let's say there's a variable called something that's going to be passed to our function over here. As soon as we get this variable as an input, we can do anything with this variable over here. So in this case, this is something. So this means that we can do this with something over here. And this is something can be used inside this block of code. And when we call our function, we have to add data inside these parentheses over here. So in this case, the calling function will be like this. So let's say we have decided to pass 1, 2, 3 over. Well, in this case, when this line of code gets triggered, the computer is going to search for where this function is declared. So it's obvious that we have declared it over here. Then it's going to pass over this piece of data, which is 1, 2, 3, over to this variable over here. So now, effectively inside this function, which is my first function, we now have a variable called something, and that is equal to 1, 2, 3. And it can be used inside block of code to do something with this piece of data over here. So instead of something over here, if we call our function with 1, 2, 3, it's going to be do this thing with 1, 2, 3. Now it's a bit like plugging a USB stick into our computer. If we took a different piece of input, we would end up with different file being shown by the computer. So this means that we have two different USB sticks over here. So for this one, we are going to have different inputs in our computer. For the second one, we are going to have completely different inputs in our computer. So this means that computer can do something different depending on the input that we give it. And if we change that input, it will receive a different piece of data. Now, in addition to this simple function over here, we can also create a function that allows input. So I'm just going to comment over here, put function with input. And to do that, you saw earlier on the syntax that it's going to the same as before we used def keyword. So I'm just going to put def keyword. Then before I put just greet. So in this case, I'm going to name our function greet with name. Then after name, we are going to put parentheses over here. Then instead of leaving this inside parentheses, we need to create a name of variable that's going to be passed over here. So let's just call it name because that describes the data that we are going to be received. So in this case, we are going to receive the name of person to greet the person. So that's why I'm going to name the parameter name. Then after parentheses, we need to put colon over here. Now after putting colon, if I hit enter one more time, it's going to be indented over here so we can write our code inside this function over here. Now here, one more time, I'm going to use print function. Now inside print function, we are going to use this name variable over here. Now it's obvious that here again, we are going to use f string. So to use f string, I'm going to put f, then after f, I'm going to put quotes, so hello, then inside braces, I'm going to put name. Now we can do the same operation for the second print statement. So in this case, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So instead of hello, I'm going to put how are you and name over here. Now here, I'm just going to comment this part, so I don't need to call this function over here. So I'm just going to call the second function with the parameter. Now in this case, when we are calling this function greet with the parameter, you see that it shows name parameter over here. Now if I select it and open parentheses, you see that the prompt says that it requires a parameter. So we need to provide an input over here. Now in this case, as an input, if I put Elshad and hit run, you'll see that in this case also it's printing out hello Elshad and how are you Elshad. Now instead of Elshad, if I put Eddie and run it, you see that this time the output will be different. So in this case, based on the parameter, we can change the execution of the function like this. So we are providing an input, so based on this input is providing an output to us. So every time when we execute this function, it gets a modify a little bit, changing the input. Now when we are talking about functions with inputs, there are two things that we are going to work with, and that's really important to differentiate them. So we know that when we call this function, we need to pass over this piece of data. And effectively, we are creating a new variable called something, and we are setting it to equal to this piece of data that we are passing to it. Now in programming lingo, you will hear this being referred as a parameter and this piece of data being referred as an argument over here. Now the argument is actual piece of data that's going to be passed over this function when this is called over here. Whereas the parameter is the name of data, and we use the parameter inside function to refer to it and to do things with it. Now very often on the internet, when you come across somebody explaining something to be on a Stack Overflow or in some piece of documentation, you will hear them referring these two types of things, the parameter and the argument. So if you need to, come back and listen to this lesson and remind yourself the difference between those things. The parameter is the name of the data that's being passed in, and the argument is the actual piece of data. Now sometimes people also get confused on the internet between these two words, but as long as you know what that means, then you will be in a good place. Now with this, we have come to the end of this lecture. So in this lecture, we have learned functions with input. Hopefully everything is clear about them. So see you in the next lecture.